Karen stormed onto my property, furious, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. "You think you can ignore the rules and get away with it?" she yelled, as I stood my ground, ready for whatever she threw my way. The tension crackled in the air. This wasn't just a parking ticket anymore. This was war. She made the mistake of calling 911 on me, not knowing that I'm the one who answers those calls. But as the sirens approached, I realized one thing. This battle was far from over. The fight for control was just beginning. Welcome back to Confessions of HOA. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. I had always prided myself on my calm, collected demeanor. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, but I was always prepared to face them head on. That was until I crossed paths with Karen, the HOA president who seemed to think she owned not just the neighborhood, but the very air we breathed. It started as a typical morning, one of those crisp autumn days where the sun feels like a promise, and the world seems to be moving just a little bit slower than usual. But then I saw the notice on my front door. I'd been living here for 5 years, inheriting the house from my late uncle. A modest home in a well-kept suburban neighborhood, a place where you could count on the grass being green and the neighbors being civil. Or so I thought. The HOA had always been a quiet background noise in the community, something I tolerated. Pay the fees, follow the rules, and live my life. Simple, right? But Karen had other plans. She had a knack for enforcing rules, even the ones that didn't make a lick of sense. That day, the notice on my door wasn't just a reminder to mow the lawn or trim the hedges. It was a letter demanding that I stop parking in my own driveway. I read it twice. My driveway, the one I'd parked in since the day I moved in. Apparently, Karen had decided that I was in violation of some obscure rule about how far my car was allowed to be from the curb. She demanded immediate compliance, or I'd be fined, and not just a small fine either. A hefty one, a fine that would add up quickly, making it clear that she was serious. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I called the HOA office to ask for clarification. "Hi, I received a notice about parking in my driveway, and I don't understand why," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Oh, that's Karen's thing," the voice on the other end replied, almost as if it was a regular occurrence. "She's very particular about driveway alignment. You'll need to move your car immediately to avoid the fine." I was dumbfounded. What in the world was she talking about? That's when the frustration started to set in. I had seen Karen around the neighborhood before. She was always overly involved in everyone's business, giving unsolicited advice, organizing neighborhood meetings, and keeping tabs on everyone like some self-appointed ruler. But this was a whole new level of control. I stood in my front yard, staring at my car parked exactly where it had always been. I could hear the faint sound of Karen's voice from across the street, barking orders at another neighbor. She had this way of making you feel like you were constantly under scrutiny, always being judged by someone who thought they were above you. And then it happened. I turned to see her walking toward me, clipboard in hand, her ever-present air of superiority on display. "You're not supposed to park there," she said, without even greeting me. I stared at her, bewildered, trying to process what was happening. "This is my property. My driveway. I've parked here for years." Karen narrowed her eyes. "That doesn't matter. The rules are clear, and you're in violation." A knot formed in my stomach. I had heard rumors of her overstepping before, but this was too much. I wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when she was trying to bully me into compliance. I could feel the old instincts kicking in. This wasn't just a battle over a parking spot. It was a battle for my rights. My freedom. I wanted to argue more, but before I could speak, Karen whipped out her phone and, with a dramatic flourish, dialed 911. "Hello?" "Yes," she said into the phone, speaking loudly enough for me to hear. "I need to report a violation of HOA rules. Someone's blocking their own driveway and refusing to comply with regulations." My jaw dropped. Did she really just call the cops over a parking spot? Before I could react, I heard her add, "Yes, the man's name is Mr., my last name. He's being uncooperative, and I'm afraid he's causing a disturbance." I couldn't believe it. She wasn't just enforcing HOA rules. She was weaponizing the system to intimidate me. That's when it hit me. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I wasn't just some random homeowner who could be pushed around. I wasn't just some guy who didn't have the backbone to fight back. I was the sheriff in this town, the one who answered those 911 calls. And now, she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Before all of this chaos with Karen and the HOA started, my life was relatively simple. Nothing too extravagant, but it was mine. I had worked hard for everything I had, and when my uncle passed away, leaving me his house, it felt like a fresh start. The house wasn't much, 3 bedrooms, a little yard in a quiet neighborhood, but it had character. It was in a place where the neighbors were mostly friendly, the streets were clean, and everything just worked. Or so I thought. I moved in, settled in, and after a couple of weeks, I noticed the HOA notices on the street corners. They were mostly harmless at first, reminders to trim the bushes or clean up after the dog, the usual stuff. I didn't pay much attention to them. The fees were small, and I figured, like most people, I could live with a few rules to keep the place looking nice. I had no idea that these small, inconspicuous rules would be the thin edge of the wedge that would come to pry open every part of my life. I had always been a calm person, used to handling stressful situations with patience and a level head. That's what made my job as a sheriff so fitting. It wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about understanding people, knowing how to talk to them, and most importantly, how to listen. When I wasn't dealing with the stress of police work, I found peace in the quiet of my home. But then, one day, I got the first official letter from the HOA. It was a standard one, reminding me to make sure my lawn didn't get too long. At first, I didn't think much of it. They had a lot of properties to manage, and a few reminders here, and there were nothing more than a part of the package deal of living in an HOA community. I had no complaints, nothing unusual. I complied and kept everything neat. But slowly, the notices began to come more frequently. Some were about trivial things, like making sure my trash cans weren't visible from the street on pickup days. Others were about more obscure regulations. And then came Karen. Karen, the HOA president, was an entirely different animal. It was clear from the start that she liked to have control over everything. You could feel it whenever you saw her walking through the neighborhood with her clipboard, checking off boxes as if she were the queen of the block. I first met her during a neighborhood meeting, something I had reluctantly attended because of a letter about the community block party. From the moment she stood at the front of the room, taking charge of the meeting, I could tell she was a woman who craved power. Her presence was undeniable. She didn't just want to run the HOA. She wanted to control every detail of everyone's life in this community. She had an answer for everything, and if you questioned her, it was clear that you were stepping into her territory. Her smile was tight, like a mask she wore to keep people at arm's length. Beneath it, I could see the subtle manipulations at work. At first, I tried to stay out of her way. She didn't bother me, and I didn't bother her. But little by little, I began to notice the cracks in her facade. She would nitpick at the smallest infractions, your lawn not being perfectly edged, your trash cans not tucked just right. All the while, she would make sure to remind everyone about how important it was to keep the neighborhood pristine and how we all need to follow the rules for the greater good. That's when I started hearing the whispers from the other neighbors, the ones who were too afraid to speak up. Karen's not just about the rules, they'd say. She's about control. It wasn't long before I realized that Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was using the HOA to push people around, impose her authority, and, frankly, make life miserable for anyone who didn't fall in line. But I had always believed in fairness. I always believed that when things went wrong, you could find a way to make them right. If there was an issue with the HOA, I could handle it. I was calm, collected, and capable of navigating any bureaucracy. I had spent enough time in the justice system to know how to stand up for myself. So when Karen first sent me that letter about the parking in my driveway, I thought it was a mistake. I figured that once we talked, it would be cleared up. I had no idea that this letter would be the beginning of an all-out war with Karen and her HOA. What should have been a minor misunderstanding became the catalyst for a conflict that would spiral out of control. And Karen? She didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down, constantly finding new ways to push me, each letter more demanding than the last. She made sure to follow through on every threat, fines, restrictions, even calling for neighborhood votes on pointless issues just to show how much power she wielded. But there was something else that kept her going. I began to notice that it wasn't just about the rules, it was about the control. She took pleasure in knowing that she could make people's lives harder, that she could push them to the breaking point and watch them squirm. And that's when I realized something about myself. I wasn't just going to take this lying down. I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else strip me of my rights or my peace of mind. I had a job to do, and this wasn't just a battle about parking spaces or lawn care. This was about standing up to someone who thought they were above everyone else, someone who abused their power to impose their will on others. So, I began to prepare for what I knew would come next. It wasn't the first time I'd seen Karen walking down the street with her clipboard, her eyes scanning every inch of the neighborhood like a hawk on the hunt. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just making casual observations. She was coming for me. It had been a couple of weeks since the parking ticket incident, and I thought it was over. Maybe Karen had moved on, realized she couldn't win this little fight. I was wrong. I should have known better. I was getting the mail that afternoon when I saw her standing on my driveway, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. My heart sank. I walked toward her slowly, trying to keep my composure. I wasn't going to let her provoke me, not this time. Mr. Last Name, she said, her tone dripping with faux politeness. We need to talk about your property. I raised an eyebrow. What's the issue now, Karen? She didn't flinch at my sarcasm. The issue, as you know, is your driveway. You've ignored the previous notice, and frankly, this isn't the first time you've ignored HOA regulations. I crossed my arms, my gaze steady. Karen, I already told you, my driveway is fine. I've been parking here for years. There's no issue. She didn't back down. It's not just about your parking spot, she snapped. It's about the principle of the rules. You think you're above them, don't you? I took a deep breath, trying to steady the growing frustration in my chest. I wasn't a stranger to confrontation, but Karen was different. She didn't just push, she bulldozed. Every word she spoke felt like a deliberate jab. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to break me down, make me feel small, as if she had the power to dictate every aspect of my life. The rules are here for a reason, she continued, her voice growing colder. And if you continue to ignore them, there will be consequences. She pulled out a thick envelope from her bag and handed it to me. Consider this your final warning. I didn't even need to look at the letter. I could already feel the weight of it. Another fine. Another demand to bend to her will. The same routine, again and again. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just about a stupid parking spot or some technicality. It was about control. About Karen asserting her dominance over me, over everyone in this neighborhood. And I wasn't going to let it happen. I glanced down at the envelope for a brief moment, then met her eyes. Karen, I said, keeping my voice level but firm, you need to understand something. I'm not going to back down. You can't intimidate me with these empty threats. This is my property, and I will not let you push me around. For a moment, she seemed taken aback. I could see the flicker of irritation in her eyes. She wasn't used to anyone challenging her authority, but then she quickly masked it with that same fake smile. Oh, I'm not trying to intimidate you, Mr. Last Name, she said sweetly, her tone turning sugary. I'm just trying to help you follow the rules. It's really for your own good, you know. Her condescending tone made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. The only thing you're doing is overstepping, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. Karen's expression hardened. You'll regret this, she muttered under her breath, her voice low, almost threatening. You'll regret not listening. I watched her storm off without another word. My heart was pounding, but I stood still, refusing to let her see how rattled I felt. The nerve of her, to speak to me like that, to think she could control everything in this neighborhood just because she had a title. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just a petty squabble over some driveway. Karen was playing a dangerous game, one that I wasn't willing to lose. She'd already made it personal, and that was a mistake. I went inside, took a seat at the kitchen table, and opened the envelope she had handed me. The fine was steep, but it wasn't the money that bothered me. It was the principle. Karen had crossed a line. She thought she could bully me into submission, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. As I sat there, the weight of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about me or my parking spot. It was about the HOA and its power that had been used to control, to bully, to silence anyone who dared to challenge it. Karen had gotten too comfortable in her position. She had crossed the line, and now, I was going to make sure she regretted it. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. I would have to be smart, patient. I couldn't let my emotions get the best of me. I needed a plan. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the envelope. Karen had no idea what was coming for her. The days following my confrontation with Karen felt like a slow, agonizing build-up, like the steady tightening of a noose. She had thrown down the gauntlet, and I knew she wasn't going to let up until I gave in or buckled under the pressure. But what she didn't understand was that I wasn't going to be bullied. I wasn't going to just roll over and let her get her way. I had spent too many years dealing with hard situations to let someone like Karen push me around. But that didn't mean I wasn't feeling the strain. The first new notice arrived a week later. Another letter, this time for a different infraction, something about my fence being an inch too high in the backyard. I had never even noticed it. I had inherited the house with that fence already there, and I had never thought to question its height. But Karen had apparently decided that it violated some obscure rule, and now I was being fined. The fine was steep, far steeper than anything I'd ever expected for a small mistake. I stood in my yard that evening, staring at the fence. The irony of it all hit me hard. This was my property, my land, and Karen, with her ridiculous power trip, was dictating what I could and couldn't do on it. Every time I received a new fine, it felt less like a warning and more like a slap in the face. She was pushing me, trying to break me down, and I could feel the pressure mounting. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I took a deep breath, folded the notice, and tossed it on the kitchen counter. That night, I spent hours researching HOA regulations. Every rule, every clause, every technicality. If Karen thought she was going to make a fool out of me, she had another thing coming. I was going to fight this, and I was going to fight it smart. But the next few days weren't any better. The fines kept coming. Another one for a tree in my front yard, which she claimed was inappropriately pruned. Another for an unruly patch of grass near the mailbox, which she deemed unacceptable. By the time the third notice arrived, I was numb. It was like Karen had a personal vendetta against me, using every small infraction as an excuse to impose her will. I was getting frustrated, but I knew I couldn't let it show. I had to stay calm. I had to stay focused. But it was hard. There were days when I would sit at my desk, reviewing the fines, the letters, and the constant barrage of complaints, and I'd feel a creeping anger rise within me. I had done nothing wrong. Yet here I was, being treated like a criminal by someone who couldn't see past her own ego. It wasn't just the fines, though. It was the way Karen started showing up at my door. At first, she'd send a letter, then she'd call. But now, she was knocking on my door unannounced, demanding to inspect my property for any more potential violations. She had no shame. She walked around like she owned the place, strutting across my yard, pointing out things I hadn't even noticed, things that shouldn't matter in the first place. And all the while, she wore that smile, the one that made her look like she was doing me a favor, when all she was doing was making my life hell. Each time, I would remain calm, professional even, despite the irritation gnawing at me. Karen, I've already addressed your concerns, I would say, trying to keep my voice steady. If there's a specific issue, I'd appreciate it if you put it in writing. Otherwise, please respect my space. But she wouldn't respect it. She'd stand there, arms crossed, as if daring me to challenge her authority. And challenge her I did, in my own way. I made sure to document everything. The fines, the letters, the visits. I recorded the times she showed up uninvited, the things she'd said. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not if it came down to a legal battle. Not if it meant I had to expose her for what she was, a power-hungry bully who had no business dictating the terms of my life. But the stress was taking its toll. I could feel the tension building in every part of my life. It wasn't just the fines, it was everything. My job, my relationships. I was becoming obsessed with the battle against Karen and the HOA. I spent every spare minute researching laws, talking to neighbors who'd been through similar fights, and figuring out how I could fight back. The other neighbors noticed. A few of them had started speaking to me more often, offering words of support. Some of them were too afraid to stand up to Karen themselves, but they were starting to see what I was seeing, her overreach, her arrogance, her complete disregard for personal rights. Some of them even began whispering that they'd been victims of her petty rule enforcement, too. It was small comfort, but it was something. I wasn't alone in this. But the tension kept rising. The next time Karen showed up on my doorstep, I was ready for her. She walked across my yard with that clipboard in hand, her head held high. I noticed the lawn, she said without so much as a hello. It's not to code. You'll need to get it reseeded by next week, or I'll have to issue another fine. I had had enough. Karen, I said, my voice controlled, but there was a sharp edge to it. I've had enough of these constant complaints. I'm not your personal project. I'm not going to bend to your every whim just to make you feel powerful. This is my property, and I'm done playing by your rules. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't surprise, it was anger. Real, unrestrained anger. She wasn't used to being challenged, and it was starting to show. I'll have you know, she began, her voice icy. You're digging yourself into a hole. You don't want to make an enemy of the HOA. I've seen people lose their homes over far less. I met her gaze, unblinking. Then it's a good thing I'm not scared of you, Karen. Her smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. We'll see about that, Mr. Last Name. We'll see if you can keep your property if you continue defying the rules. She turned on her heel, marching away with the same sense of superiority she always carried. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. I had a plan. A strategy. And Karen was about to find out that she was messing with the wrong person. The moment Karen walked away from my front door, her threats hanging in the air like a foul odor, something inside me clicked. I could feel the old, familiar calm returning, the sharp focus that I had learned to hone over the years. This wasn't just about some HOA fine or her petty power struggle. This was about standing up for myself and for everyone who had quietly endured her reign of control. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her make me another victim in her game. I walked back into the house, closing the door behind me with a soft click. For a moment, I just stood there in the foyer, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wasn't scared anymore. No, Karen had done something far worse. She had made a mistake. She had underestimated me. I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, methodically going over everything that had happened, every letter I had received, every threat she had made. I had to be precise, calculated. There was no room for error. If I was going to take on the HOA, I needed to arm myself with more than just words. I needed evidence. I needed a plan. First, I made a list of every violation Karen had claimed I'd committed, everything from the fence that was too high to the lawn that wasn't perfectly manicured. I knew she was trying to paint me as a problem for the neighborhood, but I also knew she was grasping at straws. None of these so-called violations had any merit, not in a legal sense. I went online and dug through the HOA regulations for this area, every single page. I knew Karen's game, and I was going to expose it. She thought she could manipulate the rules to fit her own narrative. But I was about to turn the tables. I found a loophole, one that would make her accusations crumble. The HOA's governing documents were full of contradictions, and I was going to use them against her. Next, I started collecting every letter, every fine, and every notice Karen had sent me. Each one was meticulously filed, each one a reminder of the overreach she had forced on me. But it wasn't just the documents I needed, it was the record of her behavior. I began to document every interaction with her, every time she had shown up at my door without notice, every threat she'd made. I started recording our conversations, just in case. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was building a case. I wasn't going to just respond to her threats. I was going to hit back with the full weight of the law. The more I thought about it, the clearer my plan became. I wasn't just going to fight this fight alone. I needed a lawyer. I needed someone who could help me navigate this battle. So, I picked up the phone and made the call. The lawyer I spoke with was a seasoned pro, someone who had handled HOA disputes before. He listened carefully as I explained the situation. After a few minutes, he gave me the most satisfying answer I had heard in weeks. You've got a solid case, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Karen's actions are far beyond the scope of what the HOA can legally do. You've got the evidence, and I'll help you put together a strategy to fight back. We'll make sure she knows her place. I could feel the tension in my shoulders start to ease as the weight of the situation shifted. I wasn't fighting this battle on my own anymore. I had a legal expert on my side, someone who could guide me through the next steps. I hung up the phone and let out a long, deep breath. The pieces were falling into place. I had the law on my side. I had the evidence. I had a strategy. Now, it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment to strike. The next day, I drove to the courthouse, a stack of papers in hand. I needed to file a formal complaint. I wanted to make sure Karen knew this wasn't just a game. This was real, and I was going to make sure she felt every inch of it. By the time I got back home, my phone was buzzing with messages from a few neighbors who had been following my situation. They wanted to know how they could help, how they could stand with me. It felt good, knowing I wasn't alone in this. But as much as I appreciated their support, I knew this battle was mine. It was mine to win or lose. The tension in the house was palpable as I set my papers down on the kitchen table. I was ready. I wasn't backing down. I would keep my cool, stay patient, and fight this the right way. Because once the wheels were in motion, once I had filed my complaint and taken my legal steps, there was no turning back. I could hear Karen in my mind, barking orders and throwing her threats, but I didn't flinch. I was the one holding the cards now. The day of the showdown finally arrived. I had been waiting for this moment, gathering evidence, preparing my case, and filing complaints. But nothing had prepared me for the weight of walking into that room, facing Karen with all of her arrogance, knowing that I was about to change the game. I received the notice about the HOA meeting in the mail a few days earlier. The letter was curt, just like Karen. It didn't beat around the bush. It was a formal request for me to appear before the board to address my repeated violations of HOA policies. Of course, Karen had pulled the strings to make sure it was all official, but this time, the stakes were higher. The letter mentioned something about a final decision, and I knew exactly what that meant. If I didn't attend, they'd find me in contempt. If I did, it meant a showdown in front of everyone. I arrived at the community center early. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars, most likely the board members. I could already feel the tension building in my chest. This wasn't just a meeting. It was my chance to finally take control. I walked into the meeting room and found it sterile, almost courtroom-like. The board members were already seated, their faces neutral but wary. At the head of the table, of course, was Karen. She looked up from her clipboard and gave me a tight, forced smile. It was the same smile she had worn every time she'd tried to exert her power over me. But today was different. Today, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Mr. Last name, Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. I'm glad you could finally join us. I'm sure you're aware that this meeting is about your repeated disregard for the rules. The board is very concerned about your behavior. I took a deep breath, standing tall. I'm aware, Karen. I'm also aware that the rules you're citing are being manipulated to target me, and frankly, I'm tired of it. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unsure of what to make of my response. But Karen didn't falter. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. We're not manipulating anything, Mr. Last name. You've broken the rules, repeatedly. We're simply doing our job to ensure that this neighborhood remains a pleasant place for all residents. Not everyone shares your relaxed attitude towards property maintenance. Relaxed? I asked, a bit of a chuckle escaping me. I'm not relaxed. I'm compliant with what's reasonable. But you, Karen, are using your power to bully people like me into submission. It's not just about the rules anymore, is it? It's about control. Her face flushed. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly aware of the tension rising in the room. I'm going to stop you right there, Mr. Last name, Karen said, her voice sharper now. This isn't about control. This is about following the rules, something you seem unwilling to do. I knew I had to stay calm, no matter how badly I wanted to lash out. I needed to outsmart her, not outscream her. You want to talk about the rules? Let's talk about the rules, Karen. The HOA regulations clearly state that all fines and actions must be in accordance with what's explicitly laid out. I've gone over these rules repeatedly, and nowhere in these documents does it say I can't park in my driveway or prune my own trees. You've been making arbitrary decisions based on your personal agenda, not the rules of the association. There was a slight shift in Karen's demeanor, just the slightest twitch in her jaw. She had expected me to back down, to grovel. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. We don't need to debate this further, she said, almost too quickly, as if she was losing her composure. The board has already voted on the matter. We've decided to impose additional fines and I've already filed a formal complaint with the city. I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. I've also consulted a lawyer, and we're prepared to take legal action if necessary. You've violated my rights, Karen, and if you think you can keep pushing me around, you're mistaken. The room went dead silent. I could feel Karen's eyes on me, furious but cornered. Her grip on the clipboard tightened, but she didn't speak for a moment. The other board members looked anywhere but at her, clearly uncomfortable. It was like I had pulled the rug out from under her, and now she was scrambling to regain control. You, Karen started, her voice trembling slightly. You're threatening legal action? Against the HOA? This is a waste of time. It's not a threat, I said, meeting her gaze. It's a promise. You've overstepped. You've made this personal, and now, I'm prepared to take it as far as it needs to go. There was a long, heavy pause. Karen was fighting to hold on to her composure, but I could see it slipping. The confident facade she wore was cracking. She wasn't used to being challenged, not by someone like me, someone she thought was just another homeowner to intimidate. Mr. Last name, one of the board members, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, his voice nervous. We need to ensure the rules are followed, but we also need to listen to what you're saying. Perhaps we should discuss this further with legal counsel before moving forward. Karen's eyes flared. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. But it was clear her authority was being questioned. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back as she turned to the rest of the board. Fine, we'll take a break, but we will continue this discussion. As Karen stormed out of the room, I stayed seated, my hands clasped in front of me. I could feel my pulse steadying, the adrenaline fading as the weight of the moment sank in. I had won this round, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Karen wasn't going to give up that easily, but the wheels were already in motion. The question now wasn't whether she would retaliate, it was how far she would go, and I was ready for whatever she threw at me next. The days after the HOA meeting felt like a strange kind of silence before a storm. I knew I had won that first round, but Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. I could already feel the tension in the air. I was bracing myself for what was coming, and it didn't take long for the storm to hit. It started with a letter. Of course, it was from Karen. It wasn't a fine or a notice this time. It was something much worse. A smear campaign. She had gone to the trouble of drafting a public notice about me, sent out to every household in the neighborhood. In it, she accused me of being a repeated violator of community rules, a disruptive force who disrespects the well-being of our neighborhood. She painted me as a troublemaker, someone who didn't care about the community. The letter was filled with half-truths, exaggerations, and outright lies. She even had the audacity to suggest that I was endangering the safety and harmony of the block. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking with a mixture of disbelief and fury. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me, trying to paint me as the villain in this story. I had expected retaliation, but I hadn't expected this. It wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about Karen destroying my reputation, trying to make me the outcast. I couldn't let her win. But this time, I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as just confronting her directly. She had made it personal, and now I had to fight back with the same level of intensity. The next morning, I stood in front of my house, scanning the street as neighbors walked by, reading the letter in their hands. Some looked at me with raised eyebrows, others avoided my gaze altogether. The atmosphere had shifted. What had once been a quiet, friendly neighborhood now felt tense. People were talking about me behind closed doors, whispering about what kind of trouble I'd caused. Karen had done exactly what she intended. She had sown doubt. But I didn't let that intimidate me. I had my own cards to play. I spent the next few hours in my home, methodically gathering all the documentation I had collected so far. The HOA fines, the legal advice, the transcripts of my conversations with Karen. I took everything and laid it out in front of me. I wasn't going to just sit back and let her destroy my life. I had a plan. I needed to take action. Fast. I called my lawyer, and after a brief discussion, we decided to file a counterclaim. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about fighting back in a way that would show Karen that she couldn't get away with this kind of underhanded attack. We filed a defamation suit and formally alerted the HOA board to the slanderous actions Karen had taken. I wasn't going to let her tear down my reputation without consequences. But even as I took these steps, I could feel Karen's retaliation escalating. It wasn't just the letter. She began showing up uninvited to my property, inspecting my lawn and driveway again, making petty comments about things that had already been addressed. She was like a shadow, constantly lurking in the background, waiting for the moment to strike again. She was testing me. She wanted to see if I'd crack under the pressure. She wanted to break me down, make me second-guess my every move. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had too much at stake. This wasn't just about parking spaces or tree pruning anymore. It was about standing my ground, protecting my rights. One afternoon, Karen came by again. I was ready for her. Mr. Last name, she said with that smug smile of hers. I see you've decided to take the legal route. It won't help you. You're just wasting time and money. I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting this. You're the one who's wasting time, Karen. You're the one who's making this personal. But I'm not backing down. Her smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. We'll see how long your little legal games last. The HOA is not going to back off. You'll regret this. She turned and walked away, but as I watched her retreat down the street, I knew the battle wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The retaliation continued in the days that followed. Every time I turned around, Karen was there, lurking, trying to provoke me into making a mistake. I could see it in her eyes. She was desperate. Desperate to make me crack, to make me feel the weight of her authority. But I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. I kept my head down, focused on the legal steps I was taking, but the tension was palpable. Karen was losing control, and I could feel it. Her desperation was starting to show, and I knew that soon enough, she'd make another mistake. And when she did, I'd be ready to strike back harder. I couldn't help but wonder, though, how far was Karen willing to go to keep her grip on power? How much more was she willing to destroy in her quest to break me? The days after the HOA meeting felt like a strange kind of silence before a storm. I knew I had won that first round, but Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. I could already feel the tension in the air. I was bracing myself for what was coming, and it didn't take long for the storm to hit. It started with a letter. Of course, it was from Karen. It wasn't a fine or a notice this time. It was something much worse. A smear campaign. She had gone to the trouble of drafting a public notice about me, sent out to every household in the neighborhood. In it, she accused me of being a repeated violator of community rules, a disruptive force who disrespects the well-being of our neighborhood. She painted me as a troublemaker, someone who didn't care about the community. The letter was filled with half-truths, exaggerations, and outright lies. She even had the audacity to suggest that I was endangering the safety and harmony of the block. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking with a mixture of disbelief and fury. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me, trying to paint me as the villain in this story. I had expected retaliation, but I hadn't expected this. It wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about Karen destroying my reputation, trying to make me the outcast. I couldn't let her win. But this time, I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as just confronting her directly. She had made it personal, and now I had to fight back with the same level of intensity. The next morning, I stood in front of my house, scanning the street as neighbors walked by, reading the letter in their hands. Some looked at me with raised eyebrows, others avoided my gaze altogether. The atmosphere had shifted. What had once been a quiet, friendly neighborhood now felt tense. People were talking about me behind closed doors, whispering about what kind of trouble I'd caused. Karen had done exactly what she intended. She had sown doubt. But I didn't let that intimidate me. I had my own cards to play. I spent the next few hours in my home, methodically gathering all the documentation I had collected so far. The HOA fines, the legal advice, the transcripts of my conversations with Karen. I took everything and laid it out in front of me. I wasn't going to just sit back and let her destroy my life. I had a plan. I needed to take action. Fast. I called my lawyer, and after a brief discussion, we decided to file a counterclaim. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about fighting back in a way that would show Karen that she couldn't get away with this kind of underhanded attack. We filed a defamation suit and formally alerted the HOA board to the slanderous actions Karen had taken. I wasn't going to let her tear down my reputation without consequences. But even as I took these steps, I could feel Karen's retaliation escalating. It wasn't just the letter. She began showing up uninvited to my property, inspecting my lawn and driveway again, making petty comments about things that had already been addressed. She was like a shadow, constantly lurking in the background, waiting for the moment to strike again. She was testing me. She wanted to see if I'd crack under the pressure. She wanted to break me down, make me second-guess my every move. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had too much at stake. This wasn't just about parking spaces or tree pruning anymore. It was about standing my ground, protecting my rights. One afternoon, Karen came by again. I was ready for her. Mr. Last name, she said with that smug smile of hers. I see you've decided to take the legal route. It won't help you. You're just wasting time and money. I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting this. You're the one who's wasting time, Karen. You're the one who's making this personal. But I'm not backing down. Her smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. We'll see how long your little legal games last. The HOA is not going to back off. You'll regret this. She turned and walked away, but as I watched her retreat down the street, I knew the battle wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The retaliation continued in the days that followed. Every time I turned around, Karen was there, lurking, trying to provoke me into making a mistake. I could see it in her eyes. She was desperate. Desperate to make me crack, to make me feel the weight of her authority. But I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. I kept my head down, focused on the legal steps I was taking, but the tension was palpable. Karen was losing control, and I could feel it. Her desperation was starting to show, and I knew that soon enough, she'd make another mistake. And when she did, I'd be ready to strike back harder. I couldn't help but wonder, though, how far was Karen willing to go to keep her grip on power? How much more was she willing to destroy in her quest to break me? It had been a few weeks since Karen's smear campaign and the retaliatory fines. The air in the neighborhood felt thick with tension, and each day, the same cycle repeated itself. Karen's attempts to provoke, my methodical response, a back and forth that seemed endless. But as much as she tried to knock me down, the wheels were already in motion. I had taken the first step, and now it was time to unleash the full weight of my strategy. I knew I couldn't just rely on my legal complaint anymore. Karen had already proven that she wasn't going to back off, no matter how much evidence I had. This had become about something deeper, holding her accountable and putting a stop to her abuse of power. I wasn't just fighting for my rights anymore. I was fighting for everyone else who had quietly endured her reign, afraid to speak out. I started with the paperwork, everything I had gathered so far. Every letter, every fine, every photo I had taken of Karen standing in my yard, clipboard in hand, harassing me with her accusations. I compiled it all into one airtight case. But this wasn't just about fighting back. This was about making sure that Karen knew she was losing control, that she was on the verge of being exposed. I couldn't let her keep doing this to people in the neighborhood. But I had to be strategic. Timing was everything. If I went too fast, if I came on too strong, Karen might find a way to twist the narrative. I had to play it cool, keep the pressure building until I had enough to make her backpedal. The first breakthrough came when I received a call from my lawyer. He had managed to get his hands on some important documents, ones that could change the entire direction of this battle. There's something here you need to see, he said. It's a loophole in the HOA's bylaws that could make Karen's fines and actions completely invalid. I felt a rush of adrenaline. It was the opening I had been waiting for. We scheduled a meeting to go over the specifics, and once I understood the legal implications, it was clear. Karen had overstepped, and now I had the leverage to challenge everything she had done. With this new evidence, I could file a formal petition to void the fines, discredit her actions, and potentially even bring legal action against the HOA board for failing to follow their own rules. The next step was preparing the public angle. I knew that, with the right approach, I could expose Karen for what she really was. A tyrant, using her position to bully anyone who didn't agree with her. I had to make sure I had the public support. I wasn't just going to fight this in a courtroom. I was going to fight it in the court of public opinion. I printed out copies of the documents I had, along with a statement that laid out my case. I was calm and measured in my approach. No wild accusations, just facts. I mailed them out to every resident in the neighborhood, including the HOA board members. I wanted to make sure that everyone knew the truth. I knew this could backfire, but if I didn't act now, Karen's tactics would win, and the cycle would continue. A few days passed, and the response came in waves. People started approaching me, neighbors who had previously been silent, now speaking out in support. The fear that had gripped them for so long was starting to fade. Some offered to testify if necessary, others asked how they could help. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. The shift in the neighborhood's energy was palpable. Karen's power, which had seemed so absolute just weeks before, was now starting to crack. But Karen wasn't backing down. She was furious, that much was clear. She started to retaliate again, this time more personally. She sent a letter threatening to sue me for defamation, claiming that my public statements were damaging her reputation and the HOA's. She had the audacity to call my actions a personal attack, and threaten legal action of her own if I didn't retract everything. The letter was laughable, almost comical, in its desperation. She was fighting back, but I could feel it. Her grip was slipping. She was cornered, and now she was lashing out. I knew I had to be careful. This was the point where I could either escalate the conflict or continue to outsmart her. I had already won the public battle, but the legal war was far from over. I decided to play my hand carefully, making sure that every move I made from here on out would push her closer to making the biggest mistake of her life. I consulted my lawyer, and we agreed on a plan. We would counter her defamation threat by presenting our evidence in a way that would make her look like the villain in this story. With each passing day, Karen was digging herself deeper. Her threats were growing more erratic, her actions more reckless. She was losing control, and I could see it in every email, every letter, every phone call she made. She had no idea what was coming next, but I wasn't ready to reveal my full hand just yet. The time wasn't right. I needed to wait for the perfect moment, the moment when Karen's arrogance would be her undoing. I could already feel the tide turning in my favor. I just had to stay patient, keep playing the long game. The chessboard was set, and Karen was about to make her next move. The question was, would she play right into my hands? Or would she lash out one more time, giving me the opening I needed to finish this once and for all? It happened faster than I could have ever expected. The last few weeks had felt like a game of chess, each move carefully calculated, each piece slowly advancing toward the endgame. I had managed to get under Karen's skin, making her look reckless in front of the neighbors, while my legal team prepared to hit her with everything I had. The tension was building, and every interaction with her felt like it was just one more step toward a showdown that would leave her with nowhere to go. I had been waiting for her to make a mistake, and like clockwork, she did. It came one afternoon when I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the latest legal correspondence, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Mr. Last name? The voice on the other end was shaky, as if unsure about what they were about to say. I'm Sarah. I'm on the HOA board. I think you need to hear this. My heart skipped a beat. I'd had my suspicions about the HOA for a while, about the way they had handled things, the way Karen had manipulated the rules, but I never expected this. Go on, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I don't know how to say this, but Karen, she's been hiding something. There's something she's been doing behind the scenes that no one on the board knows about. And I think you need to know. I leaned forward in my chair, my pulse quickening. What are you talking about? There was a brief pause before she spoke again, her voice low, almost a whisper. She's been falsifying the meeting minutes, manipulating the votes, and she's been doing it for months. It's not just you, Mr. Last Name. She's been doing this to other homeowners, too. She's been making up fines, sending out false notices, all under the guise of the HOA's authority. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. Are you telling me that the HOA has been operating illegally? That Karen has been falsifying records? Yes, she said, her voice shaking with the weight of the truth. I've seen the records. She's been doctoring everything to make it look like the board has agreed to the actions she's taken. But none of us approved it. It's all been her doing. She's been playing all of us. I sat back in my chair, trying to digest the bombshell she had just dropped. This wasn't just a personal vendetta between Karen and me anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. Why are you telling me this? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it. I can't keep quiet anymore, Sarah said, her voice thick with guilt. I'm on the board, and I've watched Karen manipulate the system. I can't stand by while she keeps getting away with it. But I'm too scared to do anything on my own. I'm sorry. I paused, letting her words sink in. This was the twist I hadn't expected. The revelation that Karen wasn't just overreaching in her attempts to control the neighborhood. She was breaking the law, undermining the very foundation of the HOA itself. She was a fraud, and now I had the ammunition I needed to take her down. Thank you, Sarah, I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind in my mind. I'll handle this from here. She hesitated before speaking again. Be careful. Karen has a way of making people disappear in this neighborhood. She's got the support of most of the board, and they're all loyal to her. But I can't watch this happen anymore. The line went quiet for a moment before I spoke again, determined now more than ever. I'll take it from here. And Sarah, don't worry. You've done the right thing. I hung up the phone, sitting there in stunned silence for a moment. The weight of the revelation hit me like a freight train. Karen had been manipulating the HOA for her own gain, using her position to harass, intimidate, and control the residents. But this was the smoking gun I had been waiting for. The legal leverage I needed to bring her down once and for all. I immediately contacted my lawyer, explaining the new development. He was as stunned as I was, but we both knew what had to be done. We were going to take this information and run with it. Karen had crossed a line, and now I had everything I needed to turn the tables. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and meetings. We meticulously gathered the evidence, organizing everything from Sarah's confession to the falsified records Sarah had mentioned. We weren't just going to file a complaint. We were going to file a lawsuit, one that would expose Karen for the fraud she was. I could already picture her face when she realized everything she had worked for was about to come crashing down. As the pieces came together, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. The fight had been long, and it had been hard. But this was the moment that everything changed. I wasn't just standing up for my rights anymore. I was about to expose a dangerous, vindictive woman for the fraud she was, and I was going to make sure that no one else had to suffer under her rule. But as I prepared to file the lawsuit and expose Karen's crimes, I couldn't help but wonder, what would her next move be? Was she truly out of options? Or was she planning one final, desperate strike? The morning of the final confrontation, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. This wasn't just about the fines anymore, or the harassment, or even Karen's sick need for control. It had become something bigger, something personal. I was ready, but I couldn't shake the tightness in my chest. This was it. The moment that would either end with her finally backing down, or with me exposing her for good. There was no turning back. I had everything in place. My lawyer, the evidence, the public support, and the law on my side. But Karen wasn't going to make this easy. I could feel it. She had spent weeks on the offensive, playing dirty, attacking my reputation, trying to make me look like the villain. Now, it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. I walked into the community center with a steady pace, each step bringing me closer to the moment where I would either win or lose it all. The room was packed with board members, neighbors, and the usual mix of curious onlookers. But none of them mattered. All I could focus on was Karen, sitting at the head of the table with that smug, false confidence on her face. She looked like a woman who had already won. She had no idea what was coming. She saw me as I walked in and stood to greet me, her smile tight and forced. "Mr. Last name," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I hope you're ready to face the consequences of your actions." I could see the cracks in her facade, though. The way her hand tightened around the papers in front of her, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had done everything she could to undermine me, but she knew this was it. This was the moment where everything she'd worked for came crumbling down. I took a deep breath, walking past her and making my way to the table where I sat, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. The room fell silent. The board members avoided looking at me, their eyes darting to Karen, waiting for her to take charge. But this time, Karen's power had already begun to slip. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm, "this isn't about rules anymore. This is about you manipulating the system to serve your own interests." She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't about to let her interrupt me. "You've falsified records. You've harassed residents. You've ignored every rule that was meant to protect us. And now, it's time for you to be held accountable for it." Karen's eyes flashed with fury, but she forced a smile, leaning forward to meet my gaze. "You think you've won, don't you? You've only just started, and I'm not about to let you take control of this neighborhood." I didn't flinch. I had seen this version of Karen before, the angry, desperate version, the one that couldn't handle the truth being exposed. She was cracking, and she knew it. "I'm not here to take control, Karen," I replied evenly. "I'm here to make sure that you can't use your power to destroy people's lives anymore. You've gone too far. And now, the law is going to deal with you." I turned to my lawyer, who was sitting at the back of the room, his eyes focused and ready. He stood up and walked to the front, holding a folder with all the documents that would expose Karen for the fraud she was. "We've gathered all the evidence," my lawyer said, his voice clear and authoritative. "And we're filing a formal complaint with the city, requesting an immediate review of the HOA's activities. We will also be pursuing legal action against Karen personally for her actions." Karen's face turned white. For a split second, I saw her mask slip completely, her confident demeanor shattered. She tried to regain control, standing up abruptly, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "This is absurd. You're going to ruin everything. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut her off. "You've been using your position to harm this community, to manipulate the system for your own benefit. And now, you're going to face the consequences of your actions." The room was tense. The board members, who had been loyal to Karen, were now looking at each other nervously. The atmosphere had shifted. Karen's supporters were suddenly unsure. Their loyalty wavered by the undeniable truth of what was happening. But Karen wasn't going to give up that easily. She turned to the board, trying to rally support, but the words were coming out in a stammer now. She could feel the walls closing in. "This isn't over," she spat. "You can't do this to me. I'm in charge here." "You're not in charge anymore," I interrupted. "The law is." I stood, watching Karen falter as she realized the inevitable was coming. Her grip on the HOA was slipping, and she was running out of options. This was her last chance to keep up the facade, and she was failing. She opened her mouth to speak again, but her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw it: fear. The woman who had terrorized this neighborhood for so long, who had tried to control every inch of everyone's lives, was now powerless. I turned to the room, my voice calm and resolute. "This is a community built on fairness and respect, not intimidation and lies. I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for every person she's ever bullied, every rule she's broken, and every injustice she's inflicted." Karen's face twisted in rage, but there was nothing she could do. The truth was out. Her time was up. The days after the meeting passed by in a blur. I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed Karen for the fraud she was, and the neighborhood was finally beginning to breathe again. The tension that had been hanging in the air for so long started to dissipate. People were talking, yes, but this time, it was with relief, not fear. I had stood my ground, and in the end, I had won. But as the dust settled, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It wasn't just about the fines or the legal battles. It wasn't even just about Karen anymore. It was about what I had learned in the process. The quiet resilience I'd always carried had been tested, pushed to the limit, and in the end, it had carried me through. But the person I had become was not the same person who had walked into that first HOA meeting, unsure of how to fight back. I spent a lot of time thinking about the journey. It wasn't just about being right. It was about the principle of standing up for yourself, standing up for what's fair, even when it feels like the world is stacked against you. Karen had tried to break me, to make me feel small, to make me doubt myself. But I'd held my ground. I had learned to play the long game, to strategize, to stay calm in the face of aggression. And I realized now, as I stood in my front yard watching the sun set over the neighborhood, that I wasn't just standing up for my own rights. I was standing up for everyone who had been quietly suffering under Karen's rule, everyone who had been too afraid to speak out. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board made it clear that Karen's reign was over. Her manipulation of the records had come to light, and the board, under new leadership, issued a formal apology to the residents. The fines were rescinded, and the community began the process of healing. But there was still something satisfying about knowing that Karen had been held accountable for her actions, that I had been the one to expose her. Her attempts to use the HOA as her personal weapon had failed, and the power she'd so arrogantly wielded had crumbled. I thought about how different things could have been if I had let fear control me, if I had backed down when she started sending those letters, or if I had simply accepted the fines. But I didn't. And it wasn't just because I wanted to win. It was because I knew it wasn't right. Sometimes, doing the right thing means standing up to people who think they can use their position to push others around. It means fighting back against injustice, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. The journey had been exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. But in the end, I came out stronger. I had learned that the real strength lies not in how loud you can shout, but in how calmly you can face the storm. I had learned patience, resilience, and the importance of staying grounded in your principles. And I had learned the power of strategy, of planning ahead, of playing the long game, and of waiting for the right moment to strike. As I stood there, thinking about everything that had happened, I realized something else. This wasn't just my victory. This was a victory for every person who had ever felt oppressed by authority, for every neighbor who had silently accepted unfair treatment. My fight with Karen had become something bigger than just us. It had become a fight for fairness, for community, and for the idea that no one person should have the power to control everyone else. And then, I thought about the future. The HOA might be different now, but what if something like this happened again? What if another Karen came along, trying to bully her way through life? I couldn't let that happen. Not again. I looked around the neighborhood, now quieter, more peaceful. The tension was gone, but the lessons remained. People had seen what happened when someone stood up for what was right, and maybe, just maybe, that would make a difference for the future. But that was a fight for another day. For now, I was going to enjoy the peace. I'd earned it. So what about you? Have you ever had to face down someone who thought they could control you? How did you stand your ground? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more HOA drama.